A single coin?
Marked with the devil's own hand. Welcome to Fabled Codex. I am your host, Mithrant. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? I treasure every comment. Let's unravel this mystery together. It was in the late autumn of the year 89 that I was once more privileged to share in one of those strange adventures that so frequently brought Sherlock Holmes into the limelight of London society. The fog of the city hung thick and yellow, curling in ghostly wreaths about the gas lamps and settling in the gutters with a clammy persistence. Within the snug confines of our Baker Street sitting room, the fire glowed cheerfully, though outside the evening grew oppressive with that peculiar dampness which seeps into the bones of every Londoner. It was upon this evening that a singular visitor arrived. Sir Reginald Alcroft, a baronet of no small influence in the political circles of Whitehall. His ruddy complexion, now drained of its usual vitality, spoke to the great agitation under which he labored. With trembling hands, he removed his hat and coat, scarcely waiting for the courtesies of greeting before exclaiming, "My dear Mr. Holmes, I am undone. A crime most unholy has taken place, and Scotland Yard can make neither head nor tail of it. I beg you, sir, for your intervention." Holmes, who had been languidly stretched upon the sofa with his violin at his side, regarded the man with that quick, hawk-like gaze which so often struck terror into wrongdoers and reassurance into his clients. "Compose yourself, Sir Reginald," said he, motioning to the chair opposite. "Dr. Watson and I are at your disposal. Pray unburden yourself of the facts." The baronet sat, drawing a deep breath before beginning. "It is my brother, Lord Henry Alcroft, found lifeless this very morning within his study at Alcroft House. There were no signs of violence upon his person, nor any disorder in the room. The door was locked from the inside, the windows barred, and yet there he sat in his chair, stone dead." Holmes leaned forward, his thin fingers steepled beneath his chin. "A locked chamber death, then?" "Continue." "What chills my very soul," said Sir Reginald, his voice lowering to a whisper, "is the singular object left upon his desk." "A coin, Mr. Holmes, an old sovereign of Queen Anne's time, upon which was scratched a mark resembling a devil's claw. Scotland Yard dismisses it as the fancy of a madman, but to me it is a signature of malice, a token of some hidden foe." At this, Holmes's eyes glittered with a strange light. "The devil's signature, you say? Fascinating." Watson, though accustomed to many oddities in our adventures, could not help but shudder at the grim imagery conjured by the tale. "There is more," Sir Reginald added, with a nervous glance toward the fire. "2 nights past, my brother had spoken of being followed, shadowed, as he put it, by a figure in the fog. He would not confide more, save that he felt an ill fate fast approaching. Now he is gone, and that cursed coin remains as the only clue." Holmes rose abruptly and paced the room, the tails of his dressing gown flaring as he turned. "We have here," said he, "a death within a locked chamber, a token left behind, and the premonition of pursuit. The combination is rare indeed, Watson, and calls for our immediate attention." "Then you will take the case?" Sir Reginald implored. Holmes stopped pacing, fixing his guest with a cool, decisive stare. "I shall take the case, Sir Reginald, for there is method in this devil's work, and it is my business to unravel it." Thus began one of the most singular investigations of my association with Sherlock Holmes, a case wherein reason and superstition collided upon the stage of London, and where the smallest of coins bore the weight of life and death. Would you like me to continue with Section 2, the case introduction, where Holmes demonstrates his deductive flair before they set off for Alcroft House? Holmes wasted no time in summoning his keen faculties to action. The firelight caught his profile as he turned from our guest to the table, upon which his pipe and notebook lay in their accustomed place. With a swift motion, he struck a match, drew upon the pipe until the room filled with a bluish haze, and regarded Sir Reginald with that detached calm which never failed to steady the nerves of the most desperate supplicant. "You speak of your brother's study being locked from within. Pray describe the position of the body with exactitude," Holmes demanded. Sir Reginald clasped his hands together, steadying his voice. He was seated at his writing desk, his head fallen back against the chair. A lamp still burned, papers lay before him, and upon those papers rested the coin. The door was bolted. The windows secure. The servants broke through only after receiving no answer to their knocking at the customary hour. "Excellent," Holmes murmured. "And the coin, did you bring it with you?" The baronet reached into his breast pocket and produced a small velvet pouch, which he placed reverently into Holmes's slender hands. From within, Holmes withdrew the piece of gold and held it under the lamplight. The sovereign was tarnished, but clear enough to display a crude scratch. A jagged mark slashed across its face in such a manner that, if one employed imagination, it resembled a taloned claw. Holmes turned it over several times, even holding it to his nose as if to detect some odor imperceptible to ordinary senses. He tapped it lightly against the table, then slipped it back into the pouch with a smile of satisfaction that chilled me. For it was the smile of a man who sees a shadow of truth hidden to all others. "Watson," said he, "observe our visitor. Note the faint trace of chalk upon his cuff, though he himself has not touched billiards or slate this evening. Note, too, the frayed seam of his glove, yet the leather itself is new. And mark, above all, the small burn upon the edge of his left thumbnail. These three facts alone, were I to speak them before their significance revealed itself, might appear trivial. Yet together they tell me that Sir Reginald has this day inspected closely the very hearth of his brother's study, searching for what eluded the constables. Am I correct, sir?" The baronet started visibly, his jaw falling open. "By heavens, Holmes, you are indeed correct. I did kneel at the fireplace, believing some hidden mechanism might be there. But how in the world—" "Elementary," Holmes interrupted with a wave of his hand. "But let us not waste time in marveling. You searched for the wrong thing. The fireplace was not the solution, though it is part of the scene. What interests me most is not how the murderer entered, but why he left behind this curious token." He tapped the pouch gently, like a man holding a cipher yet to be solved. I could not restrain myself from speaking. "Surely, Holmes, it is no more than a grotesque calling card, a madman's flourish." "Ah, Watson," said Holmes, with that good-natured condescension I knew so well, "never assume madness where method can be discerned. Our murderer is no lunatic. He is a craftsman of deception. The scratch upon this coin is deliberate and speaks to a purpose. It is a language, though not one in which most men are literate." At this, Sir Reginald shuddered, his face paling. "You make it sound as though the fiend has struck before." Holmes's gaze grew distant. "That, Sir Reginald, is precisely what I intend to discover." He turned sharply to me. "Watson, prepare yourself. We leave for Alcroft House at once. The night is yet young, and if the devil's hand has indeed left its mark in London, then it is not for us to sleep whilst it writes its signature anew." Within moments we had gathered our coats and hats. The hansom cab was hailed, and we set off through the fog-bound streets, the clatter of hooves echoing into the darkness. Sir Reginald sat rigid, his hands gripping his knees, while Holmes smoked in silence, lost in the labyrinth of his own thoughts. I confess a chill passed through me as we turned toward the great house, where a man had met his death in such mysterious fashion, for it seemed as though the very fog concealed the phantom pursuer who had haunted Lord Alcroft's final hours. Thus it was, beneath the yellow glare of the gas lamps and the muffled roll of carriage wheels, that we began our passage into one of the darkest enigmas ever set before the brilliant mind of Sherlock Holmes. The cab carried us steadily northward through the labyrinth of London's foggy avenues, the dim silhouettes of great houses looming like watchful sentinels behind their iron gates. The night seemed alive with whispers, the clink of harness chains, the distant roll of wheels muffled by the thick air. I could feel Sir Reginald's anxiety mounting with each turn of the wheels, while Holmes, ever inscrutable, sat half-leaning forward, his chin resting upon his long fingers, eyes half-closed as though lost in reverie. Yet I knew better than to disturb him, for such silences were often when his mind leapt furthest along invisible paths of reasoning. At last the cab rattled into Grosvenor Square and halted before the gates of Alcroft House, a stately building of gray stone whose high windows glimmered faintly in the mist. A constable stood at the entrance, and Sir Reginald's hurried words secured our passage inside. The hall was somber and dimly lit, the hush of morning already descending upon the household. A maid hurried past with reddened eyes, and the butler, grave of face, conducted us without question toward the study where the grim discovery had been made. Holmes paused before entering, his sharp gaze roving over the heavy oak door. He bent close to the lock, running his finger lightly over the bolt, and then knelt to examine the threshold where the servants had forced entry. "As I surmised," he muttered, more to himself than to us, "no marks of tampering upon the lock, and the splintering at the jamb is consistent with a single forceful strike from without. The door was truly fastened from within when they broke it. Within, the room bore the air of interrupted labor. Books and papers were neatly stacked upon the desk, the lamp still with oil, its glass chimney smudged with soot. A faint odor of extinguished smoke lingered, not wholly that of the lamp, but of something sharper, acrid. Lord Henry's chair had been righted by the servants, yet Holmes, with a quick gesture, directed that it be restored to the precise position in which the body had been found. With meticulous care, he moved it slightly back from the desk. The imagined weight of the dead man slumped upon it. He circled the desk thrice, each time bending close, sometimes tapping the wood, sometimes stooping to the carpet as though listening for a secret. His long fingers brushed over the papers, but not to read, rather to feel the texture of the fibers, the edges of the sheets. At one point, he raised a corner of blotting paper to the light and chuckled softly. "What do you perceive, Holmes?" I could not resist asking, my own nerves taut with expectation. "Only that Lord Henry was a cautious correspondent," said he with a dry smile. "Observe the deep impressions upon the blotter. He pressed heavily when writing, a habit of those who mistrust their hands' legibility. The last word he wrote before his death was a name. I shall not disclose it yet, for it may be a false guide, but I can promise you it is no accident." Meanwhile, Sir Reginald hovered anxiously by the hearth. "Holmes, surely the coin was the chief clue. What can scraps of writing reveal?" Holmes ignored him. He had dropped to his knees before the fireplace, his lens glinting as he scrutinized the iron grate. "Curious," he murmured. "The ashes here are recent, yet too little to account for an entire fire. And there, Watson, do you see? A fragment of metal among the cinders." I leaned closer and discerned a small, twisted piece of foil-like substance, no bigger than a fingernail. Holmes seized it delicately with his forceps and held it to the light. The residue of a coin's edge, I fancy, burnt in the grate. A failed attempt to destroy evidence? Or a rehearsal before leaving the sovereign upon the desk? His eyes grew bright with that fierce gleam I had come to associate with approaching revelation. He rose and moved swiftly about the room, testing the windows, the shutters, the carpet beneath the desk. At last he halted before the chair once more and laid his hand upon its arm. "There is something amiss here. The posture of the body, the absence of struggle, the serenity of his features, all are inconsistent with sudden violence. Lord Henry did not meet death by the hand, but by some subtler instrument. Poison?" I suggested, recalling too many cases where Holmes had discerned the silent hand of chemistry. "Possibly, but not by ingestion. The glass at his side is unstained, the lips unmarked. There are, however, means of delivering poison more insidious than the common draught." His eyes turned again to the coin, and he gave a thin smile. "A sovereign may serve more than one purpose, Watson. It can purchase loyalty or administer death." Before I could demand explanation, a sharp rap sounded at the door. Inspector Lestrade entered, his familiar sharp features betraying both irritation and relief at finding Holmes already at work. "I thought I should find you here, Mr. Holmes," said he with a thin smile. "I see Sir Reginald has run to you the moment our back is turned." "Well, I'll not begrudge you a look, though we've the case in hand." Holmes regarded him coolly. "In hand, Lestrade? Or merely grasping at shadows? No matter, we shall see whose hand proves the firmer. For my part, I begin to perceive a design, and if I am correct, the true danger has not yet passed." Sir Reginald gave a start. "You mean—" "I mean," Holmes said gravely, that the one who left the devil's signature upon that coin may yet strike again, and sooner than we think." Lestrade's expression darkened at Holmes's words, his narrow shoulders squaring as though to fend off the sting of them. "We have examined the room most thoroughly," said he in his clipped manner. "There is no sign of forced entry, no struggle, and no trace of anything stolen. A sudden seizure or stroke seems most natural. The coin, though strange, may be the act of some mischievous servant, or perhaps his lordship himself in some fit of eccentricity." Holmes regarded the inspector with a half-smile that conveyed more pity than mockery. "A seizure, Lestrade? In a man who but the evening before spoke of being shadowed in the fog? In a chamber where a fragment of scorched metal lies in the grate, and a poisoned sovereign sits upon the desk? Come, you can do better," Lestrade bristled. "Poisoned sovereign, you say?" "That is conjecture, Mr. Holmes." "Not conjecture," Holmes replied evenly, "but probability. Watson, fetch me my case of reagents from the hall." I obeyed, returning with the small leather-bound box he carried on such occasions. Holmes set about his work with quiet efficiency, dropping a scraping from the coin's surface into a vial and adding a few drops of clear liquid. At once the solution clouded to a dull white. He nodded as though confirming a private thought. "Arsenical compound, as I anticipated," he said. The scratch upon the coin's face was no idle mark, but the channel in which the poison was rubbed. A man handling the coin incautiously, rubbing his lips or brow thereafter, would deliver to himself a minute, yet lethal dose. "The sovereign is both weapon and signature." Sir Reginald gave a low exclamation of horror, while Lestrade looked both skeptical and unsettled. "A neat tale," said the inspector, "but if this be true, how did the coin come into his possession? None of the servants would dare, and no stranger could enter unseen." "That," Holmes said softly, "is the question. For the coin is no ordinary trinket. It belongs to a series, an exceedingly rare series, known among collectors as the Devil's Mint, owing to the peculiar markings some bear. Only a handful exist in London, and their owners are known to one another. Lord Henry must have received it from one such hand. If we discover from whom, we discover the murderer." At this he straightened, his eyes gleaming. "We shall require a list of your brother's acquaintances in the numismatic world," he told Sir Reginald, "particularly any with whom he quarreled or to whom he owed obligation." Sir Reginald thought for a moment. "There is Mr. Oliver Vane, a dealer in rare coins, with whom Henry had frequent dealings. Also Lord Calthorpe, who shared his passion, though their tempers often clashed over matters of provenance. Beyond these, I know of few." Holmes made a note with his pencil. "We shall begin with Vane. A dealer, if unscrupulous, has many opportunities to slip such a token into the hand of a client. Yet I shall not exclude Lord Calthorpe, for enmity breeds opportunity as readily as trade." He turned then to the window, pressing his hand lightly upon the sill. The fog pressed close against the glass, and faint droplets clung where the chill seeped through. "Note, Watson, the condensation here. Yet the room is warm, the fire recent. The window was opened after the lamp was lit, perhaps to admit one who should not have been admitted by the door. Closed again, it leaves the impression of solitude. That is how our visitor departed unseen." Lestrade leaned forward. "Then you admit someone entered?" Holmes' smile was thin. "Of course, Inspector. Only you assumed he entered by the door." A silence fell, heavy with implication. I saw Sir Reginald's face pale once more, his hand tightening upon the back of the chair. Then the fiend came and went like a shadow, leaving death and a mark of the devil behind. "And if he could enter once, he may enter again," Holmes concluded, his tone cold as steel. "Which is why we must act swiftly. Come, Watson. We pay a call upon Mr. Oliver Vane at first light. Tonight, however, I have one more observation to make here." He strode suddenly to the writing desk, seized the blotter, and with deft hand held it up against the lamp's glow. A faint mirror of letters sprang into view, the impression of the words Lord Henry had last set upon paper. Holmes's lips moved silently as he traced the outlines, then he replaced it with a curious expression that was half grim satisfaction, half doubt. "Gentlemen," said he at last, "Lord Henry Alcroft died with a name upon his lips and his pen. That name, I believe, will lead us either to the murderer or to a deception most cunningly laid." Lestrade stepped forward. "Whose name, Mr. Holmes?" But Holmes only shook his head. "Patience, Inspector. If I speak now, you may chase the shadow while the figure escapes. I will tell you this much. It is a name of weight, and one that will draw us further into the fog before we emerge into light. For tonight, keep guard upon this house. Tomorrow, the hunt begins." The chill of dawn had barely lifted from Baker Street when Holmes roused me from my slumber with the brisk energy of a man who had not slept at all. He stood already dressed in his frock coat, his hat in hand, and a glint in his eye that told me his mind had worked tirelessly through the night. The smell of strong coffee filled the air, and upon the table lay the sovereign, now sealed within a small glass phial. "Come, Watson," said he, as I hastily donned my coat. "The city wakes, and with it, men whose affairs are best examined before they have composed their alibis. Oliver Vane's shop opens with the sun. We must be the first to cross its threshold." The hansom rattled us eastward through the awakening streets, where milkmen clinked their bottles at the doors and the market stalls groaned under their loads. Fog still lingered in the alleys, reluctant to depart, as though wishing to shroud whatever mischief London harbored that morning. Holmes, silent as a stone image, kept his gaze fixed upon the passing houses, his fingers drumming softly upon his knee. At length we arrived in a narrow lane off the Strand, where a modest sign above a dusty window declared "O. Vane & Co. Numismatics." Inside, the shop was dim and orderly, glass cases glittering with rows of ancient coins, medals, and tokens, each neatly labeled. A bell tinkled at our entrance, and a thin man emerged from the back, his long, pallid face framed by dark whiskers. His hands, though bony, moved with the delicacy of a jeweler. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," said he with a voice of mild surprise. "Your names are not unknown to me. To what do I owe this visit at so early an hour?" Holmes inclined his head. "A man lies dead, Mr. Vane, and his passing is tied to a sovereign such as only a handful of collectors in London might possess. I need scarcely tell you why I am here." The dealer's eyes flickered, though his expression remained composed. "Lord Henry Alcroft, I presume?" "A tragic loss. He was among my best patrons." "You suspect, perhaps, that I supplied him with the coin in question?" Holmes drew forth the phial and placed it upon the counter. Vane bent low, peering at the marked sovereign with a gleam that was half fascination, half unease. "Indeed, this piece passed through my hands some months ago. It was part of the so-called Devil's Mint, a notorious set of anomalies struck in Queen Anne's reign. I sold it to Lord Henry, who insisted upon possessing it at any price. But I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, it left me untainted. I deal in rare metals, not poison." Holmes's gaze never wavered from the man's face. "And who supplied it to you?" "That," said Vane, spreading his hands, "I cannot say with certainty. Coins pass from estate to estate, from collector to broker. This one came to me by way of a private seller, whose name I am bound by confidence not to disclose." Holmes leaned closer, his voice low and sharp. "Confidence has no standing when murder intrudes. Give me the name." The dealer hesitated, his fingers worrying the edge of the counter. At last he said, "Very well. It was Lord Calthorpe. He entrusted it to me for sale, though he swore it was an unwelcome heirloom." I had no reason to doubt him. "If you accuse me of complicity, I can only protest my innocence." Holmes allowed himself the faintest smile. "I accuse no man until the facts compel me, but your candor is appreciated. Watson, note this carefully. Lord Calthorpe, whose name we heard already from Sir Reginald." "The circle tightens." Vane gave a weary shrug. "If you seek a villain, I doubt you will find him among my shelves. Coins are my livelihood, not the instruments of death." Holmes replaced the phial in his pocket and turned toward the door. "We shall see. For now, good day to you, Mr. Vane. Should you recall aught else of importance, I advise you to speak swiftly, before silence condemns you." Back in the cab, Holmes's face was set in stern reflection. "Consider it, Watson. Vane is a cautious man, yet fear glimmered in his eye when I pressed him. He named Calthorpe not with relief but with reluctance. Either he dreads implicating a man of influence or he shields himself from guilt. In either case, the path leads us next to Calthorpe's door. But before we seek him, there is another call to make. Another? I asked, surprised. Yes, said Holmes. Lord Henry wrote a name before his death. I shall not reveal it even to you, my dear fellow, until I have confirmed its weight. For now, we must visit a quarter of London where shadows linger longest, and where the truth may lie hidden among the refuse of men's lives. Trust me, Watson, the coin was but the signal. The true story lies beneath it. And with that, the cab turned once more into the mist, bearing us deeper into the maze of the waking city. The cab bore us eastward, leaving behind the respectable avenues for narrower streets, where the air grew rank and the fog pressed heavier. Holmes, with his collar turned up and his eyes alight, leaned forward in anticipation as though the very pulse of the city guided him toward his object. I confess I was bewildered. Holmes, I said at last, you speak of another call before confronting Lord Calthorpe. To what quarter of London are we bound, and for what purpose? He smiled faintly, his gaze never leaving the blurred outlines of the streets. You shall see, Watson. When a man of noble birth dies under mysterious circumstances, the truth is seldom found among his peers alone. Gold is a curious traveler. It passes from palace to gutter with equal ease. If Lord Henry's death is bound to this coin, then somewhere among London's underbelly is the whisper of how it came into his hand. Our cab stopped at last before a dingy alley near the river, where the smell of tar, refuse, and damp stone mingled oppressively. A crooked sign announced a pawnbroker's shop, its windows cluttered with watches, chains, and tarnished silver. Holmes strode within as one who knows his ground, and the bent-backed proprietor looked up with a start at the sight of him. "Good morning, Mr. Rivington," Holmes said smoothly. "You recall me, I trust? I come not to entrap you, but to purchase information." The pawnbroker licked his lips, his eyes darting toward me before settling on Holmes again. "Information don't come cheap, nor does silence when it costs a man his freedom," Holmes replied sharply. He placed a half-sovereign upon the counter, which disappeared with astonishing speed into the man's palm. "Now I ask you of the Devil's Mint coins. Have any crossed your counter of late?" Rivington hesitated, then shuffled toward a drawer, fumbling among his papers. "One, sir. About 3 weeks ago, a rough sort brought it in. Swore it was honest, but I knew better. I paid him a pittance and passed it on quick to a dealer, lest trouble follow me." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And this rough sort, his name?" "Baines, sir. A dockhand, though he takes more to gin than to honest labor. You'll find him down Limehouse way if he's not already sunk beneath the river." Holmes inclined his head, satisfaction gleaming. "Excellent. You see, Watson, the sovereign left its trail like breadcrumbs. From noble to broker, from broker to pawn, from pawn to the gutter. Now we must pluck from that gutter the truth of its passage." As we departed, the fog thickened, so that the lamps burned like smudged halos in the gray. Holmes walked swiftly, his mind clearly at a gallop. "Note it well, Watson. Lord Calthorpe entrusted the coin to Vane, yet a second coin of the same mark found its way to the pawnbroker through this Baines. 2 such pieces in circulation at once, too great a coincidence. Either Calthorpe lied, or another hand distributes them with malice aforethought." "Then you suspect more than one coin has been prepared for the same deadly purpose?" I asked, chilled at the thought. "Precisely. One poisoned sovereign may be an accident, 2 are design. And if design, then we must look for the mind directing it." He paused, drawing deeply on his cigarette. "This Baines may know little, but even a fool's tongue can reveal the shadow of his master." The cab rattled us further east toward Limehouse, that labyrinth of wharves and alleys where the river lapped black and oily at the steps. The fog there seemed to brood more thickly, carrying with it the faint cries of sailors and the clatter of chains upon wood. As we alighted, Holmes turned to me with quiet urgency. "Stay close, Watson. A man who deals in poisoned gold is not likely to keep gentle company. Our adversary grows bolder by the hour, and until we unmask him, every step may bring us nearer to danger, or to revelation, or to revelation." With that, we plunged into the twisting alleys, the sound of our footfalls muffled by the damp stones, seeking the wretched soul whose hands had once held a coin that bore the devil's mark. The alleys of Limehouse were labyrinthine, the fog curling like restless fingers around the piles of crates and the rotting timbers of the wharves. Holmes moved with a quiet precision, his long coat brushing the damp cobblestones, his eyes ever alert to the flickers of shadow that might betray a lurking figure. I followed closely, though my senses were filled with the oppressive smells of brine, coal, and the faint tang of human excrement. It was an environment wholly different from the polished drawing rooms and grand houses I had become accustomed to, yet under Holmes's guidance, even the squalor took on a pattern, a logic that promised hidden order beneath apparent chaos. "Observe, Watson," Holmes whispered as we paused before a low, half-collapsed building fronting the river. "The boards have been disturbed recently. Footprints lead to the side entrance, and yet the main door remains locked. Our man moves with care, or he would have been noted by the night watchman." We crept closer, the muffled lapping of the river against the wharves our only soundtrack. Holmes drew a small pair of forceps from his pocket and knelt, examining the mud. "Here," he said, pointing. "Impressions of heavy boots, the pattern of a rope-soled shoe. Baines is of slight build, yet he wears such boots when he wishes to appear more formidable. Note, too, the traces of tobacco ash. He smokes a blend mixed with black leaf, quite common among river workers." A sudden creak made us both pause. Holmes held up a finger, and we froze. From within the shadows of the doorway, a figure emerged, hunched, moving quickly but with caution. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The man," he breathed. I saw him now. A wiry, narrow-shouldered fellow, ragged coat pulled tight about him, face obscured beneath a brimmed hat. He carried a small bundle in one hand and, judging from the glance he cast at the street, sought to avoid detection. Holmes signaled me to remain back as he stepped into the alley, his long stride measured and calm. "Baines," Holmes said, his voice precise, yet carrying an authority that seemed to silence the fog itself. The man stiffened, a curse muttered under his breath, and for a heartbeat I feared he would take flight. Instead, he paused, regarding Holmes with a wary suspicion. "You've no business here." "Sir?" Baines said, his voice a low rasp. "On the contrary," Holmes replied smoothly. "I have all the business that concerns a poisoned sovereign, a dead nobleman, and the truth that binds them. Your companion in this distribution of coins? Or are you its sole agent? May wish you to remain silent, but I suspect your tongue will prove more pliant than their coercion." Baines swore again and shifted the bundle nervously. Holmes's gaze did not leave him. "Inside that bundle lies a coin marked with a talon. One has already claimed a life. Another waits for its victim. You will deliver it, or we shall take steps to ensure you cannot harm another." The man's eyes flickered with panic, yet there was intelligence there too, a calculation. He stepped backward toward the side door, then paused as Holmes continued. "Do not test the limits of my patience, Baines. I know your hand has touched the metal and traces of poison remain upon your clothing. One false move and the river may prove less forgiving than I am." After a tense moment, the man slumped, yielding. He opened the bundle, revealing the glint of a second sovereign, its surface scratched in the same jagged pattern. Holmes produced a handkerchief and carefully handled it, inspecting the edge with a magnifying lens. "As I expected," he murmured. "The metal bears the faintest traces of arsenical compound, identical to the piece that killed Lord Henry. Here, Watson, is the instrument of death. And now we follow Baines to discover from whose hand it issued. The man, sensing the inevitability of his capture, led us silently through a maze of alleys, occasionally glancing over his shoulder, always wary, yet compliant under the weight of Holmes's quiet menace. At length we came to a narrow doorway, unmarked, from which the sound of voices drifted faintly. Baines paused and whispered a single word I could barely catch. "Calthorpe." Holmes nodded, a glimmer of triumph in his eyes. "So we are not mistaken in our suspicion, Watson. Lord Calthorpe himself has supplied the poisoned instrument, though whether by design or negligence remains to be determined." We pressed on, slipping through the doorway behind Baines, and found ourselves in a room cluttered with crates, ledgers, and the scent of stale tobacco. The man stopped, glanced about, and then set the coin upon a table, as if offering it to some unseen authority. Holmes moved swiftly, his keen gaze taking in the room, the position of objects, the pattern of shadows. Every detail, from the arrangement of the crates to the stains upon the floor, suggested the care of a meticulous man accustomed to secrecy and subterfuge. Holmes's lips curled in that faint smile I had learned to recognize as the precursor to revelation. "Watson, note it all. Here is the web of our mystery, the distributor, the broker, the collector, and the instrument. The next step is to confront the source directly, to test the nerve of the man whose ambition or malice has led to death. When Calthorpe is forced to account for these coins, the design will reveal itself. Baines, now cowed by the weight of Holmes's observation, muttered something about instructions he had been given and promises of reward. Holmes, ever patient, allowed him to speak, recording every detail with quiet precision. Each word confirmed the pattern we had suspected. The path from noble hand to deadly sovereign threading through the hands of intermediaries until it reached its inevitable victim. As we prepared to leave, Holmes placed a hand upon my shoulder. "Tonight, Watson, we return to Alcroft House. There are persons yet to interview, letters to examine, and shadows to follow. Each coin, each trace of poison, each impression of a hand brings us closer to the heart of this enigma. And it is there, in the careful scrutiny of minute details, that the final revelation awaits." We stepped back into the fogged streets, Baines now our reluctant guide, and I felt the anticipation tighten within me. The city seemed to hold its breath, as though aware that the pursuit had reached a crucial stage. Holmes, walking with his customary unhurried purpose, glanced at me briefly and said, "Patience, my dear Watson. Every shadow has its secret, every coin its signature, and every man his reckoning. The morning is young, but the truth does not tarry. It waits for those willing to follow its subtle course." And so we advanced deeper into the mists of London, each step a link in the chain that would, I knew, lead inexorably to the unmasking of the mind behind the devil's signature. By the time we returned to Baker Street, the fog had begun to lift, leaving the streets damp but less oppressive. Holmes moved about the sitting room with that restless energy that I had long since learned indicated he was piecing the fragments of a puzzle into a coherent pattern. He placed the recovered coin carefully upon the table, beside the file containing the sovereign that had claimed Lord Henry Alcroft's life. "Watson," he said, his eyes bright with anticipation, "observe the markings upon these coins once more. Note the subtle differences in the scratches, the pressure of the incision, the angle of each talon. These are the fingerprints of a meticulous mind, not the reckless work of an amateur. Whoever has devised this scheme is methodical to an almost surgical precision." I bent closer, examining the coins under the lamp's glow. The scratches were indeed uneven but deliberate, as if the hand that etched them had worked to a precise private design. "Holmes, you believe the same individual was responsible for both pieces?" "Without doubt," he replied. "The difference lies not in the intent, which is consistent, but in the handling. One coin was delivered to Lord Henry directly, the other passed through Baines, a subordinate. Observe the margin of error, the subtle smudges of poison along the edges. Whoever devised this calculated the likelihood of detection and chose his intermediaries accordingly." I could not help but shiver. "And Calthorpe?" Holmes tapped the table. "He is at the center of the web, yes, but not necessarily the hand that pressed the poison. Consider this, Watson. The man who orders the crime often conceives it in theory, but leaves execution to those who can move unseen, unnoticed. Our task is to trace both strands, the hand that commanded and the hand that delivered." He rose suddenly and began pacing. "We must also consider motive. Gold and revenge, ambition and envy, all may play their part. But here is what is most curious. The coin is old, of no material worth beyond its numismatic value, yet it carries death. Clearly the symbol matters more than the metal. It is a signature, a warning, a message that only those who understand the code might read. And thus, our murderer leaves a mark not merely on the body, but upon the society that observes it. I watched him, as I so often did, with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Holmes's mind worked in ways both brilliant and disconcerting, leaping from detail to deduction with a certainty that left me breathless. Holmes, I said, if the coin is the message, what is it meant to communicate? He paused at the window, looking out upon the awakening street. Patience, Watson. Every detail has its time. The coin speaks, but only in context, and the context is yet incomplete. We shall speak with Lord Calthorpe, examine the letters of Lord Henry more closely, and compare the traces of the poison with known handling techniques. Only then can the language of this devil's signature be deciphered fully. The postman arrived shortly thereafter with a bundle of letters and a newspaper, which Holmes examined with rapid attention. One envelope, unsealed but clearly of recent origin, bore Lord Henry's hand. Holmes's eyes flicked over the page, and then, in a sudden gesture, he placed it upon the desk and closed his eyes. Watson. The man whose name Lord Henry recorded before his death was neither Vane nor Baines, yet he is the key. The letters confirm a correspondence with Calthorpe, but also reveal clandestine meetings, secret debts, and disputes over coin acquisitions. The deceased was careful in his notes, yet one impression betrays the truth. The coin's pattern matches a cipher used in these letters. I leaned closer, noting his intensity. A cipher? Yes, he said quietly. Not a complicated one, but effective. The scratches, the handling, the positions on the coin, they correspond to letters or signals in the ledger kept by Calthorpe. Thus, the coin serves a dual purpose: delivery of poison and communication. Only one who understands both can interpret it correctly. The morning waned, and the streets outside grew alive with the bustle of London. Holmes seemed to sense the urgency, yet he remained calm, moving methodically from one item to the next, drawing sketches, making notations, and repeating his observations aloud as if rehearsing the logic aloud before it could mislead him. At length he turned to me, his expression hard, yet alight with a certain triumph. We have enough, Watson, to move decisively. Baines has delivered a coin, and we know from whence it came. Lord Calthorpe's ledger and correspondence reveal both motive and connection. Our next step is to confront him directly. The trap must be precise, for any misstep may allow the architect of this design to vanish once more into the fog. Prepare yourself, my friend, for the confrontation will be delicate, yet illuminating. I nodded, though my heart beat faster with apprehension. Holmes, always precise, had drawn the strands together with that extraordinary clarity that made all else seem trivial. The web of the devil's signature was almost complete. And yet I sensed he reserved the final revelation for the moment when all pieces would snap into perfect alignment. We gathered our implements, including the file of poison-laden coin, the letters and Holmes's magnifying glass, and prepared to leave for Lord Calthorpe's residence. Holmes's face, as we descended the stairs, was unreadable, yet his step was brisk, purposeful. Every muscle, every glance, suggested a mind poised at the threshold of discovery. As we passed into the misty morning streets, I felt the weight of the case settle fully upon me. From the quiet of Baker Street, through the shadows of Limehouse, to the delicate cipher of a poisoned coin, each movement had been measured, each clue deliberate. Now the final confrontation awaited, and I could not shake the sense that the devil's signature, etched upon gold and human fate alike, would soon reveal the hand behind it. Holmes walked ahead, his gaze fixed upon the path before us, and I followed, knowing that every step carried us closer to both revelation and peril. The streets grew quieter as we advanced toward Calthorpe's residence. A tall, gray stone house set back behind wrought iron gates, its windows shuttered against the chill morning air. Holmes walked with an almost imperceptible bounce in his step, a tension held tightly in check, and I matched his pace, acutely aware that each stride carried us nearer to a confrontation we could not postpone. The cab had deposited us at the curb, and we approached the gate on foot. Holmes's eyes scanning the facade as though it contained secrets written plainly in its masonry. "Observe, Watson," he murmured under his breath. "The shutters on the second floor are slightly ajar, yet no curtains billow. This is a man expecting visitors or perhaps seeking escape routes should he need them. Note the dust upon the doorstep, recently swept, yet the smudge at the latch betrays hurried passage. Someone has crossed here in haste, either in fear or in preparation." I glanced at the polished brass knocker and the clean stone steps, realizing that even these ordinary details were not lost on him. "Then he suspects an inquiry?" I asked. Holmes's lip curled faintly. "Not merely an inquiry, Watson. He knows the peril of scrutiny. Those who dabble in subtle poison understand that discovery need not be public to be fatal. We must tread lightly, yet decisively." We rang the bell, and a servant, pale and cautious, answered. Holmes inquired after Lord Calthorpe with courteous urgency, and after a moment of hesitation was shown into a drawing-room, its opulence tempered by a faint austerity that bespoke the owner's fastidious nature. Moments later, the door opened, and Lord Calthorpe himself appeared, tall, thin, and impeccably dressed, his eyes sharp beneath arched brows. He measured Holmes with a glance that was both assessing and wary, and then turned to me with polite curiosity. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said smoothly, inclining his head. "I understand you seek to discuss Lord Henry Alcroft's unfortunate demise. Pray, what brings you here at so early an hour?" Holmes did not reply immediately. He observed silently, his eyes flicking over Calthorpe's hands, the crease of his waistcoat, the polished boots. I noted the precision with which he catalogued the man's features, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, deliberately slow. "Lord Calthorpe, I come upon evidence that connects you directly to the distribution of two rare sovereigns, both marked in a manner most unusual, one of which resulted in the death of your acquaintance, Lord Henry Alcroft. The question, my lord, is whether this distribution was the act of your hand, or merely conducted at your direction." Calthorpe's lips thinned. "I am perplexed, Mr. Holmes. You speak in riddles." "I admit that I sold a coin to a dealer, Mr. Vane, as is my right. Yet to suggest that I am implicated in any malfeasance borders on absurdity." Holmes allowed a pause, letting the silence stretch, drawing attention to the delicate tension of the room. "Indeed," he said finally, "one might find it absurd were the coin not poisoned. Yet the evidence is plain. Baines, a subordinate in the chain, has confirmed that another coin passed through his hands bearing the same talon mark. The ledger, the letters, the notes of Lord Henry, each point toward you as the source, whether through commission or negligence." A flicker of unease crossed Calthorpe's face, subtle but enough to betray that Holmes's words had struck a chord. He straightened and clasped his hands behind him, attempting composure. "You accuse me of intending death?" Holmes' gaze was unwavering. "I accuse only that you facilitated it, my lord. Motive, opportunity, and pattern converge upon your person. One coin has already claimed a life. Another remains in circulation. Your response now will determine whether more are endangered." Calthorpe's eyes darted toward the sideboard, as though seeking counsel from an unseen advisor, then back to Holmes. "I had no intention of harm," he said at last, voice tight. "The coin was of interest, rare, and its possession by Lord Henry was merely a matter of commerce. I could not foresee the consequences." Holmes shook his head slowly. "Intent is not always necessary when design and opportunity meet. A man careful enough to mark the coin, to deliver it with subtlety, and to obscure his tracks cannot plead ignorance with credibility. Yet, my lord, I offer a path forward. Cooperation may yet mitigate exposure and may reveal to you the method by which Lord Henry met his end." Calthorpe hesitated, then nodded, though reluctantly. Holmes gestured for me to remain as he moved toward the desk and produced both coins, carefully placing them before the peer. He explained, methodically, how each had been handled, the traces of arsenical compound, and the chain of possession from Calthorpe to Vane, and thence to Baines, culminating in Lord Henry's death. The analysis was meticulous, every detail backed by observable fact, leaving Calthorpe visibly unsettled. At last Holmes leaned back and studied him silently, eyes calculating. "Now, my lord, I must ask, who else had knowledge of these coins, and who might have a motive to use them as instruments of death? The devil's signature is more than an ornament upon gold. It is a language. Speak, and the pattern will be revealed." Calthorpe swallowed hard. "There is one," he admitted, voice low, "who knew of the collection, and who bore resentment toward Lord Henry. A distant relative, a man of cunning and bitterness, Reginald Mortimer. He envied my cousin's acquisitions, his status, and his influence. He would do anything to claim a measure of retribution. Holmes's thin lips curved. Precisely. Watson, you see how motive, means, and opportunity intersect. Mortimer, resentful, observant, knowledgeable of coin handling, and with access to intermediaries such as Baines, completes the sequence. The coins, the poison, the correspondence, all form a chain leading inexorably to him. Calthorpe's hand twitched. Then you believe it was he who struck Lord Henry? Holmes nodded. Yes, my lord. And further, that he may attempt another strike if the remaining coin is not intercepted. We must act swiftly. Baines will cooperate under observation, and Mortimer must be confronted before he recognizes that his design has been deciphered. A tension settled in the room, as though the very walls of the house acknowledged the imminent unmasking of a man who had hidden behind wealth and subtlety. Holmes's eyes, sharp and unwavering, moved from the coins to Calthorpe, measuring, calculating, and assembling the invisible puzzle in his mind. Watson, he said finally, prepare yourself for a visit that will require patience, vigilance, and precision. For when a man seeks to murder under the guise of propriety, he is careful, but not infallible. The devil's signature is about to be revealed, and every detail we have gathered will converge in the pursuit of justice. I felt a shiver of anticipation. The morning sun had broken through the lingering fog, casting thin shafts of light upon the polished floor. Yet the shadow of Mortimer's malice seemed to linger in the corners of the room. Holmes, poised and commanding, readied himself for the final steps, the careful orchestration that would expose the architect of this deadly scheme. Every trace, every impression, every subtle mark now had its purpose. And I knew we were on the threshold of revelation. We left Calthorpe's house with a sense of purpose that pressed upon us with each step through the now brightening streets. Holmes walked with a slow, deliberate tread, his eyes scanning every passerby, every doorway, as though the city itself might conceal a crucial clue. Baines trailed a few paces behind, subdued yet alert. It was clear he understood the gravity of the morning's proceedings. I could not help but notice how Holmes's mind seemed to operate several beats ahead, the faintest smile flickering across his lips now and then, a private acknowledgement that the pieces were falling into place. Watson, he said, his voice low, observe the manner in which Baines holds himself. He is wary yet cooperative, a man aware that our scrutiny is both a shield and a threat. He fears reprisal from Mortimer, yet he recognizes that exposure now is preferable to complicity in another death. Note, too, the bundle under his arm. It still contains the second coin. Its presence is both proof and bait. We turned into a narrow lane leading to a modest lodging in which Mortimer was said to reside. The street was quiet. The fog from earlier dissipated into a chill mist, and even the occasional clatter of horse-drawn carts seemed muffled in the pre-dawn air. Holmes paused at the door of a low brick house, examining the latch, the dust upon the threshold, and the faint scuff marks near the step. Here, he murmured, lies the point of convergence. Note the absence of footprints to the left, suggesting a careful approach, and the smudge upon the handle, freshly made. Mortimer has either exited recently, or he expects an intruder. I could feel the tension in the air, a charged anticipation that seemed to quicken my pulse. Holmes rapped upon the door lightly, then stepped back. A moment later, it opened to reveal a man of slight build, his eyes sharp and restless, his expression a mixture of suspicion and feigned calm. "Mr. Mortimer?" Holmes asked, his voice smooth yet commanding. "I have come to speak of Lord Henry Alcroft, and of a coin which carries a devil's signature. You may wish to step aside, for the matter is delicate and time is short." Mortimer's lips tightened. "I know nothing of which you speak," he said at first, his tone guarded. Yet there was an imperceptible tremor in his hand as he shifted, revealing the faintest signs of unease. Holmes did not answer immediately. He observed the man, cataloging every detail, the crease of his coat, the shine upon his boots, the nervous twitch of his fingers. "We are all men capable of observation, Mr. Mortimer," he said finally. "Some observations, however, carry consequences. Baines has identified you as the source of the coin now in his possession. Its twin has already claimed a life, and another may follow unless we act promptly. The color drained from Mortimer's face, and for a fleeting moment his composure faltered. "You cannot prove it," he stammered. Holmes allowed a pause to stretch, the silence amplifying the weight of the accusation. Then he stepped closer, producing the 2 coins from the bundle Baines carried, placing them carefully upon the table. "The marks are your signature, sir. Not of the hand, perhaps, but of the mind. The scratches, the handling, the pattern of distribution all point toward you. You attempted to mask your involvement by intermediaries, yet left traces no subtler than those a careful eye could detect." I watched Mortimer shrink under Holmes's gaze, the color in his cheeks fading to the pale gray of a man caught between fear and calculation. "But why?" he began, then stopped as though the words themselves carried the weight of his own confession. Holmes leaned in slightly, voice low but deliberate. "Because envy, Mr. Mortimer. Because ambition and resentment gnawed at your patience. You coveted Lord Henry's collection, his influence, perhaps even his very life. The coin, marked and poisoned, was the instrument of retribution. Yet in seeking to conceal your design through intermediaries, you underestimated the power of observation, the inevitability of deduction." The man's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. "Yes," he muttered, voice hoarse. "I provided the coin to Baines. I did not intend to kill at first, only to frighten, to force him to relinquish his holdings. But it went too far. He died," Holmes nodded, taking careful note of every tremor, every hesitation. "And you would have continued had the second coin not been intercepted. But your plan has unraveled, and now the devil's signature may reveal the true depth of your design." At that, Baines stepped forward, explaining the exact chain of possession and repeating the instructions Mortimer had given him. Each detail corroborated the sequence Holmes had anticipated: the choice of coin, the careful scratches, the placement of poison, the timing of delivery, all meticulously planned, yet vulnerable to scrutiny when examined with methodical attention. Mortimer's face fell, and for a moment he seemed to shrink into himself, realizing the enormity of his exposure. Holmes, still calm, catalogued each confirmation, each confession, weaving them together into a pattern visible only to one trained in the art of deduction. "Now, Watson," Holmes said quietly, "observe how motive, method, and opportunity intersect. The coin is not merely a token, it is the language of intent. Mortimer's design was intricate, relying upon intermediaries and subtlety. Yet the smallest detail, a fingerprint upon a coin, a fragment of residue, a line of correspondence, betrays the whole. The devil's signature is laid bare. Lestrade arrived shortly thereafter, summoned by Holmes, and took Mortimer into custody. The man, once smug in his hidden malice, now walked meekly, understanding at last that calculation, however meticulous, could not outpace the scrutiny of reason. Holmes examined the remaining coin once more, nodding in satisfaction, then replaced it carefully in its file. I watched, astonished, as the strands of the entire mystery, from the locked room to the poisoned sovereign, to the careful network of intermediaries, collapsed into clarity before us. Every misdirection, every false lead, every subtlety of human behavior had been accounted for, and the devil's signature, once enigmatic, now lay fully illuminated. Holmes turned to me with that faint, triumphant smile. "You see, Watson, the beauty of deduction lies not in chance, nor in mere suspicion, but in the patient, logical assembly of facts. Each element, however minor, contributes to the whole. The coins were merely instruments. The true signature is the mind that orchestrated their effect." Mortimer, now escorted by Lestrade, glanced back briefly, his expression one of mingled fear and resignation. Holmes's gaze followed him for a moment, then returned to me. "And so, my dear Watson, what is concealed by design is revealed by observation. The devil's signature has been unmasked, and justice, though delayed, is served." The day had brightened fully by the time we returned to Baker Street. Yet I felt that the shadows of the morning, the fog of uncertainty, and the weight of human malice lingered still. Holmes, settling once more into his chair by the fire, seemed already to distance himself from the triumph of the case, as though the unraveling of human cunning were but an ordinary pastime. I, however, remained in awe, marveling once more at the inexhaustible ingenuity of his mind, and the extraordinary patience required to untangle a mystery as subtle, as intricate, and as deadly as the devil's signature upon a coin. The evening had fallen over London by the time we returned to Baker Street, the lamps casting long, wavering shadows along the streets and alleys. Holmes settled into his chair by the fire, hands clasped, eyes half-lidded, as if he were both reflecting and recovering from the strain of the day's exertions. I placed my own chair nearer, observing the lines of satisfaction, yet not triumph, etched upon his sharp features. He had once again orchestrated a revelation that unfolded as if by design, yet the subtlety and patience required to reach it remained hidden behind his impassive exterior. Sir Reginald Alcroft arrived not long after, summoned in the early afternoon by a brief note from Holmes, and his relief was immediate, though tinged with lingering apprehension. "So it is true?" he asked, pacing nervously before the fireplace. "Mortimer, he is taken?" Holmes inclined his head. "Yes, Sir Reginald. The chain of events, from the devil's signature upon the coin to the delivery through intermediaries, has been fully traced. Mortimer's envy and calculation brought him to commit acts which, though clever in conception, were ultimately undone by the meticulous observation of seemingly trivial details. The law will take its course, and the remaining coin is secured to prevent further harm." The baronet sank into a chair, visibly shaken, yet relieved. "And my brother? Will his death be avenged, in a sense?" Holmes's expression was contemplative, almost distant. "Avenged, perhaps, in the sense that justice is now informed by reason rather than vengeance. The guilty are exposed, the innocent protected, and the instruments of harm neutralized. That is all one can demand in a civilized society," I noted. As always, Holmes's capacity to strip emotion from consequence, yet even he allowed a trace of satisfaction to linger as he recounted the sequence of events in detail. He demonstrated how each subtle mark, each carefully concealed instruction had been interpreted, and how his persistent examination of minor inconsistencies led to the inevitable confrontation with Mortimer. Every step, he emphasized, had been logical, sequential, and immune to guesswork. Sir Reginald listened in rapt attention, his anxiety slowly giving way to admiration. "I confess, Mr. Holmes, that I had feared the matter would remain an insoluble mystery. Yet you have traced it with a precision beyond my comprehension. The devil's signature, as you called it, is laid bare." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "The mark upon the coin, while dramatic, was but the symbol of intention. The real signature lies in the thought process of the man who conceived it, and in the careful arrangement of events that followed. Observation, patience, and deduction expose what men strive to conceal." The conversation shifted naturally, with Holmes recounting the steps we had taken, from Vane's confirmation of the initial coin, to Baines's reluctant cooperation, and finally to the confrontation with Mortimer. Each link, meticulously traced, demonstrated the interwoven threads of motive, opportunity, and method. Even Sir Reginald, familiar with intrigue in political circles, seemed impressed by the clarity with which Holmes had untangled what had initially appeared as an insurmountable puzzle. After a pause, Holmes spoke again, his tone softer, almost philosophical. "Watson, what is remarkable is how men are often betrayed not by their overt actions, but by the subtleties they overlook. A smudge upon a coin, the pattern of footsteps, the sequence of correspondence. Mortimer relied upon intermediaries, thinking them invisible, yet each left a trace that, when observed in combination, revealed the whole. I could not help but reflect upon the irony of it, that such minute details, dismissed by ordinary eyes, held the power to unravel lives and reveal hidden malice. Holmes, for all his apparent detachment, had patiently examined each, interpreting them with a precision that bordered on the artistic, yet was grounded in strict logic. Sir Reginald, recovering his composure, leaned forward. "And what of the coin that remains? Will it be destroyed?" Holmes shook his head slightly. "No. The coin, while dangerous in hands of ignorance or malice, is now a preserved artifact, a reminder of the lengths to which envy and subtlety can intertwine. Its power has been nullified, but its lesson endures. Even the smallest symbol, the tiniest mark, can carry intent and consequence. I sat quietly, reflecting upon the day's events and the cascade of reasoning that had led to the capture of Mortimer. Holmes, ever the master of observation, had once more transformed chaos into clarity, exposing the interlocking motives, instruments, and actions that had culminated in death. And yet, even as the immediate threat was resolved, I felt the subtle tension that always accompanied the resolution of a particularly intricate case. The knowledge that human ingenuity, both noble and malevolent, remained a constant source of challenge. As the afternoon waned, Holmes's attention shifted naturally toward his violin, his fingers caressing the strings, producing faint, wandering notes that seemed to dissolve the tension in the room. Sir Reginald rose to take his leave, expressing gratitude that seemed to mingle relief with awe, and I followed him to the door, catching a glimpse of Holmes's thoughtful profile against the amber glow of the fire. Alone once more, Holmes reclined, eyes half closed. "Watson," he said softly, "it is curious how the mind of a criminal often mirrors that of the investigator, though one uses insight for destruction, the other for revelation." The devil's signature was clever, yet ultimately predictable. The rules of observation and deduction are universal, and no subterfuge can fully escape them. I nodded, understanding fully the quiet authority in his words. For all his detachment, there was a subtle warmth in his reflections, a recognition of the patterns of human behavior, both dark and illuminating. London, with its fog, its alleys, its quiet drawing rooms, had once again served as the stage for the interplay of intellect and malice, and Holmes had, as ever, revealed the hidden design beneath the surface. We spent the remainder of the evening reviewing our notes, discussing the sequence of events and confirming that every link in the chain had been accounted for. Even in his moments of calm, Holmes's mind remained alert, tracing possibilities, considering contingencies, and anticipating the faintest ripples of consequence. As I observed him, I realized that for him, the resolution of a mystery was not merely the apprehension of a criminal, but the full illumination of the intricate human and material details that had produced it, a delicate, extraordinary balance of observation, logic, and foresight. And so the night deepened around Baker Street, the lamps casting gentle reflections upon the street below, while within Holmes sat quietly, pipe in hand, eyes distant yet unrelenting. The devil's signature had been unmasked, the immediate danger resolved, and yet, as always, the mind that had orchestrated the solution remained restless, ready to follow the faintest thread to the next enigma waiting in the shadows of London. The following morning, London awoke under a crisp sky, the fog of recent days having lifted to reveal the city in sharp relief. The streets, glistening with the faint residue of overnight rain, carried the sounds of life, carriages rattling along the cobblestones, the cries of street vendors, and the distant chime of a church bell marking the hour. Holmes and I moved deliberately through the thoroughfares, the events of the past days still vivid in our minds, yet our purpose clear: to ensure that the consequences of Mortimer's malice were fully contained and that any remaining uncertainties in the case were resolved. Holmes's expression was calm but alert, his eyes sweeping over the passers-by and the architectural details of the city as though every element might conceal significance. "Watson," he said quietly, "it is not enough that the immediate perpetrator has been secured. We must examine the residual paths of action, the ripple effects of intent, and confirm that the instruments of harm are neutralized." We returned to Alcroft House first, where Sir Reginald awaited us with a composed yet anxious demeanor. The servants, no longer tense, moved about the halls with the routine of domestic life, yet there remained a subdued hush, as if the household collectively understood the gravity of the events that had transpired. Holmes's attention fell immediately upon the desk in Lord Henry's study, now restored to a semblance of order. "Observe, Watson," he said, kneeling to examine the chair and the surrounding floor. The subtle indentations where the body rested, the faint smudge of ash near the grate, and the residual impressions upon the blotter. Each of these has already spoken, yet it is prudent to record and confirm them for completeness. Even minor deviations can reveal unseen elements. I noted how meticulously he catalogued each detail, reinforcing the pattern that had led us from the devil's signature to Mortimer's capture. Every trace, from the placement of the coins to the impressions upon paper, had been a clue, and Holmes's methodical attention had ensured that nothing remained overlooked. Holmes straightened and regarded Sir Reginald. "Your brother's letters and ledgers are now secured, and the coin that carried the arsenical trace is contained. With Mortimer in custody, the immediate threat is neutralized. Yet the lesson endures. Attention to detail, observation of minute facts, and logical deduction are as vital as courage or force when confronting subtle criminality." Sir Reginald, visibly relieved, nodded. "I am grateful beyond words, Mr. Holmes. To think that a seemingly minor object, a coin, could carry such danger and yet reveal the identity of its designer is astonishing. Holmes inclined his head, his expression calm. "Objects do not act alone, Sir Reginald. The coin was merely a messenger of intent. It is the mind behind it that commands attention. The devil's signature is not in the metal, but in the deliberate orchestration of events, the careful manipulation of intermediaries, and the subtleties of human behavior. Recognition of such patterns is essential to unmasking hidden designs. I realized then, as I often did in moments such as these, that Holmes's genius lay not simply in observation, but in the synthesis of countless small details into a coherent narrative. Each minor smudge, each hesitation, each subtle mark upon a coin or letter had been catalogued and interpreted, revealing the overarching scheme. The elegance of his reasoning lay in its precision. Every piece had significance, and none were overlooked. Having confirmed the safety of the household and the containment of the evidence, we returned to Baker Street. Holmes settled once more in his familiar chair, pipe in hand, the fire casting long shadows across the room. He allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, though his eyes remained sharp. "Ever calculating. Watson," he said softly, breaking the silence. "The resolution of this case demonstrates the interplay of intellect and malice, of patience and impulse. Mortimer's envy and cunning could have remained hidden indefinitely had it not been for careful observation and methodical reasoning. Yet, even in triumph, one must remember that human nature is inexhaustible in its capacity for complexity." I nodded, understanding that the lessons of the case extended beyond the immediate events. The devil's signature, though unmasked, served as a reminder of the delicate balance between subtle design and perceptive scrutiny. Holmes's reflections emphasized not only the power of intellect, but also the responsibility inherent in its application. As the day waned, we received a brief note from Lestrade, confirming that Mortimer was securely confined and that the authorities were preparing for formal proceedings. Holmes, ever composed, read the note with a faint smile, then set it aside. "Justice, Watson, is a process of diligence, not drama. The law will take its course, yet our satisfaction lies in the clarity of the sequence, the certainty of understanding. The devil's signature has been interpreted, the network of deceit unraveled, and the instruments of harm neutralized." I settled into my chair across from him, reflecting on the meticulous work that had brought us to this point. London, with its foggy streets, its twisting alleys, and its shadowed drawing rooms, had once again provided the stage upon which intellect could triumph over malice. Holmes, serene and confident, had demonstrated the enduring power of careful observation, logical reasoning, and the inexorable unfolding of truth. As the fire crackled, casting warm light upon the room, Holmes leaned back and exhaled a thin plume of smoke. "Watson," he said, his tone almost conversational, "cases such as these remind us that the smallest object, the tiniest trace, can bear consequences disproportionate to its apparent significance. A coin, a scratch, a sequence of letters, each is a potential key to the mysteries concealed by human design. And yet, as always, the challenge is not merely to observe, but to interpret, to assemble, and to act upon what has been revealed. I reflected upon his words, recognizing in them both the summary of our recent endeavor and the philosophy that guided all his work. Holmes's genius was not in dramatic gesture, but in the patient accumulation of facts, the synthesis of observation into deduction, and the disciplined application of reason to the often capricious and malevolent actions of men. The evening passed in quiet contemplation. Holmes, pipe in hand, occasionally adjusted a note or sketch upon the table, yet there was a sense of closure, a measured calm that followed the unraveling of the devil's signature. The city outside continued its ceaseless movement, indifferent to the intricate drama that had unfolded within the lives of a few, yet within our rooms the resolution was absolute. As I prepared to retire, I glanced once more at Holmes, whose gaze was distant, reflecting perhaps upon the complexity of human nature, the subtlety of deception, and the perpetual necessity of vigilance. "Another case concluded, Holmes?" I asked softly. He inclined his head, a faint, almost imperceptible smile crossing his lips. "Yes, Watson. Another case concluded, yet the city remains full of puzzles awaiting discovery. The devil's signature is unmasked, yet tomorrow may present new designs, new challenges, and new subtleties to discern. That is the nature of our work." I felt a quiet admiration, mingled with the relief of completion. The chain of reasoning that had begun with a simple marked coin had led us through deception, danger, and deduction to a full understanding of human malice and method. Holmes's insights, precise and inexorable, had once more transformed chaos into clarity, revealing the hidden architecture of a deadly plan. And so, with London's night settling around us and the fire's glow warming the room, we allowed ourselves a measure of repose, conscious that in this city of fog and shadow, intellect and vigilance were ever required, and that the devil's signature, once the harbinger of death, had become a testament to the enduring power of reason and observation in the hands of a singular mind. The following morning, a crisp clarity had settled over London, the lingering mists having dissolved to reveal the city in sharp detail. Holmes, already seated by the fire with his violin leaning against the table, was absorbed in thought, his long fingers drumming lightly upon the arm of his chair. I joined him, still reflecting on the resolution of the devil's signature case, yet aware that Holmes's mind rarely remained at rest for long. There was always another thread to follow, another subtlety to explore, even in a case that had reached its ostensible conclusion. "Watson," he said at last, his voice calm, yet carrying that edge of anticipation I had come to recognize. "While Mortimer's capture closes the immediate matter, it is prudent to examine residual questions. The instruments, the letters, the network of intermediaries, each may harbor minor inconsistencies that illuminate the full measure of intent and foresight. We must ensure that nothing has been overlooked, for subtlety often lies in the minutest of details." I nodded, understanding that his insistence on thoroughness was not mere pedantry, but a safeguard against future mischief. We spent the morning reviewing our notes, tracing once more the chain from Mortimer through Baines and Vane to Lord Henry Alcroft, confirming dates, correspondence, and minor observations that might otherwise have been disregarded. Each element fit snugly into the overarching pattern, yet Holmes's meticulous scrutiny revealed faint anomalies, a slightly off-sequence delivery, a smudge upon a letter, the imprecision of a servant's recollection that, while inconsequential individually, contributed to a deeper comprehension of Mortimer's methods. Holmes's gaze, so often penetrating to the unseen core of things, lingered upon these anomalies with faint interest. "Consider, Watson," he said, "the possibility that a man of Mortimer's cunning might anticipate exposure. The errors he has left behind are not necessarily carelessness. They may be strategic, intended to mislead or delay discovery. Yet in every case there is a line between deliberate misdirection and the unconscious trace of character. Observation can discern the difference. I observed him closely, noting how he toggled between logic and intuition, always anchoring conjecture in evidence. He retrieved the 2 coins once more, placing them under the lamplight, and traced the scratches with his magnifying lens. "The poison residues are instructive. Baines handled the second coin with insufficient care, yet Mortimer accounted for him as an intermediary. The pattern suggests he understood the limitations of his agents, and yet he misjudged the constancy of deduction. Even the most meticulous plan falters when exposed to the disciplined scrutiny of reason. Holmes paused and looked toward the window, his eyes distant, surveying the bustling street below. "There is another matter," he said. Lord Henry, in his final correspondence, alluded to a second collector who was aware of the Devil's Mint coins, though he neither ordered nor distributed them. This person may have served as an observer, a witness whose presence complicates the chain of culpability. We must identify him to complete the full picture. I leaned forward, intrigued. "And do you have an idea who that might be?" Holmes tapped his chin thoughtfully. "There are hints in the ledger and the letters, a name lightly underlined, a phrase repeated. It suggests someone of status, yet discreet, whose attention was drawn to the transactions but who did not interfere. Their significance is subtle but critical, for in understanding the periphery we comprehend the center fully. To ignore this observer would be to accept only partial clarity. We spent several hours retracing Lord Henry's correspondence, examining subtle marks upon the edges of letters, the sequences of numerical notation in his ledgers, and even the residues of ink upon blotting paper. Each minor observation, innocuous to the untrained eye, contributed to the revelation of a hidden observer, someone who had monitored Mortimer's actions without leaving conventional traces of participation. Holmes's patience was remarkable. He catalogued each observation meticulously, often pausing to explain the significance of details I had long ignored, from the slant of a letter to the faint impression of a seal upon an envelope. By afternoon, Holmes had constructed a clear mental map of the chain of events and the network of observers and intermediaries. "Watson," he said finally, "observe the elegance of this design. Mortimer conceived the coin, arranged for its distribution, and ensured plausible deniability through Baines and Vane. Meanwhile, a silent observer monitored the circulation, recording each movement yet refraining from interference. It is a demonstration of human cunning, yet one which yields to patient deduction. Knowledge of the periphery illuminates the center, and in the center lies the truth." The remainder of the day was occupied with cross-checking these details against statements from the household, the dealers, and Baines himself, ensuring that every point of evidence was corroborated and that no minor inconsistency could be exploited or overlooked. Holmes's methodical approach transformed what might have appeared to others as coincidental or trivial into a coherent, intelligible narrative. As evening approached, Holmes leaned back, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Watson, the Devil's signature has been fully interpreted, yet the intellectual exercise has not concluded. Consider how the interplay of motive, opportunity, and method manifests not only in the center of criminal activity, but also among the observers, the intermediaries, and even the unintended witnesses. The coin is a messenger, the scratch is a cipher, and the observer an essential component. To understand fully, one must consider all elements simultaneously." I recognized in his words the philosophy that guided every investigation. No detail too small, no circumstance irrelevant. Holmes' mind had assembled the events into a structure of absolute clarity, and yet he always sought the final confirmation, the subtlety that would leave no ambiguity in the reconstruction of the crime. The night fell fully over Baker Street, the lamps casting gentle pools of light upon the sidewalk, while inside, the fire's glow played across the polished surfaces and scattered papers. Holmes, reclining in his chair, pipe in hand, appeared contemplative, yet ready, as always, to follow the faintest trace of human intention wherever it might lead. I felt a profound sense of resolution, tempered by admiration for the meticulous care with which he had exposed the Devil's signature, traced its distribution, confronted Mortimer, and accounted for the silent observer whose presence completed the pattern. In the quiet of the room, with the city settling into its nocturnal rhythm, Holmes finally broke the silence. "Watson, what is remarkable is that human design, however subtle, is never entirely invisible to those who observe with diligence. Mortimer's intent, the chain of intermediaries, and the observer all demonstrate a pattern. It is the same pattern that governs deduction itself. Observation, reasoning, and patience reveal what malice would conceal. I nodded, aware that the resolution of the case extended beyond the mere apprehension of a criminal. It was a testament to methodical thought, careful observation, and the inexhaustible intricacies of human behavior. Holmes, serene in his chair, seemed already to anticipate the next challenge, yet allowed a measure of quiet satisfaction in the completion of this complex investigation. And so, as London's night deepened and the lamps glimmered against the misted streets, we allowed ourselves a moment of repose. The devil's signature had been unmasked, the chain of malice broken, and the instruments of harm secured. Holmes's reflections, precise and philosophical, left an impression of both triumph and vigilance, a reminder that in the city of fog and shadow, intellect and observation remained the ultimate arbiters of justice. The case concluded, yet the lessons endured. Every detail, every trace, every subtlety mattered, and the mind that could discern and assemble them was unparalleled in its power to unveil the hidden truth. The following morning brought a gentle light over Baker Street, filtering through the tall, narrow windows and catching the faint haze of smoke that always seemed to linger from Holmes's pipe. The city outside stirred with the usual sounds of early commerce, carriages rattling over the cobbles, the call of street vendors and the occasional bark of a dog, but within the quiet of our sitting room, the weight of yesterday's revelations still hung in the air. Holmes sat, as ever, with his eyes distant yet alert, hands folded over his chest, the faint curl of a smile betraying a satisfaction measured yet not exuberant. "Watson," he said softly, breaking the silence, "while the immediate threat posed by Mortimer has been neutralized, it is prudent to consider the lingering elements. The distribution network, the intermediaries, and the subtle observer have all played a role, yet each may leave traces that persist. Our duty is not simply to apprehend, but to ensure that the comprehension of the pattern is complete, that no shadow of ambiguity remains." I rose, fetching our ledger of notes and correspondence. Holmes took them with a careful hand, scanning the details with a precision that left nothing to chance. The devil's signature, as we have termed it, is more than an isolated act. It is a system, a microcosm of intent executed with care. And as with any system, even the smallest irregularity can yield insight. Note the dates of Baines's deliveries, the timing of correspondence between Vane and Calthorpe, and the minor notations Lord Henry made upon the margins of his ledger. Each is a coordinate, a node in the network of causality. We spent the morning meticulously retracing the steps of the coin, from Mortimer's careful selection and marking, to Baines's transport, to Vane's handling, and finally its deadly reach to Lord Henry. Holmes examined the correspondence anew, noting how phrasing, punctuation, and minor shifts in vocabulary betrayed both urgency and subtle coercion. "See, Watson," he said, pointing to a marginal mark, "the repetition here is not accidental." Mortimer signaled cautiously to ensure that intermediaries acted in a precise manner. "The coin itself is merely a vehicle. The messages embedded in human behavior are far more revealing." As he spoke, I realized anew the scope of his reasoning. Each detail we might have dismissed as trivial, an extra fold in a letter, a smudge of ink, the uneven scratch upon a coin, was elevated to critical importance under his scrutiny. The devil's signature was not merely a token of death. It was a masterclass in the orchestration of human action, and Holmes had, through patience and methodical observation, rendered the design fully visible. Holmes paused, leaning back in his chair, pipe in hand. "Yet there is one aspect we must clarify, the silent observer. Lord Henry's letters suggest that a third party was aware of Mortimer's plan, monitoring the circulation of the coin and perhaps noting its effects. This person, while not an active participant, completes the architecture of the design. Identification of this observer ensures the narrative is complete, that every strand is accounted for, and that no uncertainty remains." I glanced at him, curious. "And do you suspect who it might be?" Holmes's lips curled into the faintest smile. "There are hints, Watson. Not in the overt letters, but in subtle cues, the spacing of lines, the deliberate repetition of certain phrases, and the unusual attention given to particular transactions. One need only cross-reference these details with the ledger and the sequence of deliveries to determine the observer's identity. It is a matter of correlation, of noticing what has been deliberately placed in view and what was concealed. We spent the remainder of the morning following these threads. Holmes traced the subtle notations in Lord Henry's correspondence to a close friend and fellow collector who had accompanied him on several transactions. The individual, by all appearances benign, had noted anomalies, recorded minor deviations in the pattern of deliveries, yet refrained from intervention. Holmes explained, "Observe how restraint can be as telling as action. The silent observer's inaction is, paradoxically, a form of communication. Awareness without interference shapes the narrative, providing insight to those capable of interpretation." By midday, Holmes had assembled a full reconstruction of the chain: Mortimer's planning, Bain's participation, Vane's brokerage, Calthorpe's indirect involvement, and the observer's silent oversight. Each node in the network revealed the intentionality of human action and the consequences that followed. The devil's signature, once enigmatic, now displayed its form in totality. Holmes's precision and logical rigor had transformed apparent chaos into a clear, intelligible design. As the afternoon waned, the room settled into quietude. Holmes reclined, eyes narrowed in contemplation, yet occasionally flicking over the letters and coins before him. "Watson," he said, his tone reflective, "the most instructive lesson is that human intention is often encoded in the minutest details. A coin, a scratch, the phrasing of a letter, or even a hesitation in speech can betray design. In our work, comprehension is not merely the apprehension of malefactors, but the illumination of the pattern itself, the understanding of method behind apparent randomness." I could not help but marvel at the scope of his reasoning. Mortimer's malice, though calculated, had been ultimately undone by the systematic observation of countless small details. Holmes's brilliance lay not only in noticing, but in assembling these fragments into a cohesive understanding, demonstrating the interplay of motive, opportunity, and human nature. Even as evening fell, Holmes remained at his desk reviewing the ledger once more. "The devil's signature is now fully interpreted," he remarked. "Yet it is a reminder that vigilance must remain constant. Human ingenuity, for good or ill, is inexhaustible. The instruments of harm have been secured, the perpetrators apprehended, and the observers accounted for. Yet the principles applied here will serve as a guide in every case yet to come." I realized then that this resolution, while final in consequence, was also illustrative of Holmes's enduring philosophy, that observation, deduction, and logical reasoning were tools capable of illuminating the darkest recesses of human intention. The devil's signature had been unmasked, but in doing so, it had reinforced the necessity of careful scrutiny, methodical thought, and the patient assembly of evidence. Holmes finally leaned back, placing his pipe upon the table and folding his hands in quiet satisfaction. "Watson, the case is complete. Mortimer will face justice. The coins are neutralized, and the network of observation has been understood. Yet, as always, the city awaits new mysteries, and our task, though momentarily fulfilled, is never truly complete. The mind that seeks truth must remain alert, for deception is as inexhaustible as the human heart." I settled into my chair, reflecting upon the extraordinary sequence of events. From the initial discovery of the marked coin, through the intricate web of intermediaries, to the meticulous reconstruction and ultimate exposure of Mortimer, Holmes's methodical application of observation, deduction, and foresight had rendered the complex simple, revealing both the mechanics of a criminal design and the subtleties of human behavior that sustained it. And so, as the night deepened and the lamps of Baker Street cast a soft glow across the room, I observed Holmes at rest yet vigilant, the embodiment of reason and intellect poised against the ceaseless ingenuity of mankind. The devil's signature, once a cipher of death, now stood as a testament to the power of methodical thought, careful observation, and the relentless pursuit of truth in the fog-shrouded streets of London. Now, generate the final section of the story, ensuring a satisfying resolution. Maintain the logical progression of clues and character arcs. delivering the final reveal smoothly while keeping the ending impactful and true to the detective's style. The morning sun streamed weakly through the tall windows of Baker Street, casting a soft golden haze across the room. Yet the city beyond remained shrouded in the usual murk of early London life. Holmes, as ever, reclined in his chair, eyes half-lidded yet ever-perceptive, pipe in hand. I sat across from him, reflecting on the winding path that had led from a single, ominous coin to the unmasking of Mortimer and the apprehension of every lingering thread in the devil's signature. Holmes spoke at last, his voice calm, deliberate, as if to punctuate the finality of the case. Watson, the devil's signature in its entirety, demonstrates the interplay of human intention, ingenuity, and error. Mortimer's envy set the sequence in motion. Baines executed the distribution under duress. Vane facilitated its passage through commerce, and Calthorpe's indirect involvement added an additional layer of concealment. Yet even the silent observer, the subtle witness, confirms the completeness of the chain. Each link was observable, each action traceable, if one possessed the patience and acumen to assemble the facts. I could not restrain my curiosity. Holmes, then the observer, who was he? Holmes's thin lips curved into a faint smile. Ah, yes. The observer was no mere bystander. It was Mr. Charles Whitby, a close friend of Lord Henry and a fellow numismatist. His knowledge of the Devil's Mint coins was extensive, yet he refrained from interference, content merely to note anomalies, inconsistencies, and the circulation of rare pieces. In doing so, he provided the final confirmation that Mortimer's plan was both deliberate and methodically executed, without ever touching the instruments of harm himself. Observation in this case was itself a silent guardian of truth. I marveled at the intricate logic of it all. So every player, whether active or passive, had a role in revealing the pattern, intentionally or not. Holmes inclined his head. Precisely. Human design, even in malevolence, cannot escape scrutiny. Each detail, from the scratches upon the coin to the timing of letters to the minutiae of movement among intermediaries, contributed to the eventual revelation. It is the cumulative effect of observation and deduction that unmasks deception. The devil's signature is not merely a mark, it is a narrative written in action, intent, and oversight. A knock at the door heralded the arrival of Lestrade, who entered with a mixture of deference and habitual impatience. "Mr. Holmes," he said, "Mortimer is secured, the remaining coin is in evidence, and the authorities are preparing the formal charges. It seems your deductions have not only resolved the case but ensured that no further harm can come from these pieces." Holmes inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Indeed, Inspector. Yet remember, justice is not only the capture of the guilty, but the understanding of the mechanism by which malice operates. The devil's signature, once deciphered, demonstrates the efficacy of observation, patience, and reasoning over the most carefully laid schemes." Sir Reginald Alcroft arrived shortly thereafter, his relief palpable, though tempered by the memory of his brother's death. "Mr. Holmes," he said, "I cannot thank you enough. You have unraveled what seemed impossible, not only exposing the perpetrator but revealing the full measure of his intent and his methods. My brother's death is avenged, in a sense, by the truth laid bare." Holmes inclined his head, eyes steady, voice quiet. "Sir Reginald, it is neither vengeance nor morality that governs deduction, it is reason. The consequences are evident, yet the process is what renders the solution incontrovertible. Observe, note, assemble. These are the tools by which order is restored to apparent chaos." I watched him, fascinated as always by the clarity of his reasoning. Each character, from Mortimer to Baines, Vane, Calthorpe, and Whitby, had played their part in the unfolding drama, yet it was Holmes' mind that orchestrated the revelation, transforming disparate threads into a coherent, logical whole. The devil's signature, once a cipher of death, now stood fully exposed, its intricacies rendered plain, and its lessons enduring. Holmes finally leaned back in his chair, pipe extinguished, a faint, almost philosophical smile upon his lips. "Watson," he said, "in the end, it is the combination of observation, deduction, and patience that reveals the hidden hand. A coin, a scratch, a hesitation, a correspondence, each can carry consequence, each can betray intent. The case is concluded, the pattern discerned, and the instruments of harm secured. Yet, as always, London remains fertile ground for the mysteries that await the mind prepared to perceive them. I felt a quiet admiration, tempered with the enduring sense of wonder that accompanied every resolution at Holmes's side. The city outside carried on, indifferent to the dangers that had passed. Yet within the quiet of Baker Street, intellect and reason had prevailed, illuminating the subtle, hidden designs that men sometimes attempt to conceal. Holmes rose then, adjusting his coat and smoothing his hair. "Come, Watson," he said lightly. "Let us prepare for the next engagement. The devil's signature is but one example of ingenuity and malice, yet the city teems with puzzles yet unsolved. One must remain vigilant, for the shadows of deception never truly vanish." I followed him to the door, knowing that the resolution of this case, elegant and complete as it was, also served as a reminder of the perpetual vigilance and intellectual rigor demanded by the pursuit of truth. The devil's signature had been revealed, Mortimer secured, and every subtlety accounted for. Yet for Holmes, as always, the completion of one mystery was simply the prelude to the next, and the city of fog, shadow, and human complexity awaited its ever-watchful observer. As I set down my pen that evening, recording the final details for posterity, I realized that the resolution of the devil's signature was both a triumph of intellect and a testament to human intricacy, that in every slight mark, every hesitation, every subtle design, there is a story, and that with patience, logic, and keen observation, even the most cunning plots may be revealed and understood. Holmes, serene, alert, and unassuming, had once more demonstrated that in the interplay of mind and evidence, clarity can emerge from even the darkest schemes, leaving both justice and comprehension intact.